Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Today we're going to look at the new Unearthed Arcana that was released for Eberron. We originally saw the Forgotten Realms Unearthed Arcana with some of these subclasses and stuff that were going to come out for the Forgotten Realms setting, but now they're looking at some of the changes to the Eberron setting. There is a second pass at the revision on the Artificer class, as well as a new Artificer subclass called the Cartographer. There are a bunch of new-ish feats to the Eberron setting as well, and we'll take a look at those in a future video. Today we are just going to look at the base Artificer class, because we're going to compare it to what they released with the original Artificer Unearthed Arcana post 2024. So we'll see what they revised. We'll see if they took any of our advice. I mean, I don't know what everyone's advice was, but we'll see what they changed, what they kept the same, and kind of go with our critiques from there. I'm not going to cover everything in the Unearthed Arcana in this one video. I don't know why I released everything at the same time last time. I forgot that the feedback time frame is a lot longer. The survey comes out on March 4th, but the survey is open for like 1 or 2 weeks or something like that. So I do have extra time to kind of space these things out and not make a giant video containing everything. Yeah, today we're just going to look at the Artificer, the base class. Let's go ahead and get started with that. So before we get started, I want to cover the sort of change key here. So anything that is highlighted in yellow is going to be something that is different from what it currently exists in the Artificer class, but it has not changed between the original Artificer Unearthed Arcana that was released just a bit ago and the new Eberron revision of the Artificer that was released just a few days ago. And anything that is highlighted in green is something that was new or changed within the Eberron version of the Artificer released in this Unearthed Arcana. So with that aside, let's go ahead and look at the core traits. So we're looking at the core traits. We can see that there's nothing that has been changed here. They still have the same sort of changes to the starting equipment, which is using the new 2024 model for starting equipment. Same with the multi-class inheritance. They are adding the fact that you get an extra skill when you multi-class into an Artificer from the Artificer skill list. What they still haven't done is give the Artificer an extra skill. And, up where it says skill, it says choose 2 from these sets of skills. Usually classes that grant an extra skill when you multi-class into them come with more than 2 skills to begin with. Moving on to level 1, we have Magical Tinkering. So in the Artificer Unearthed Arcana, there was some pretty big change to this. Basically, instead of having these little specific devices that kind of have a very niche use, what you can do instead is use a magic action with your Tinker's Tools to create one of the adventuring gear options that are listed here. The changes in the Eberron Unearthed Arcana is first that they changed the name to Tinker's Magic rather than Magical Tinkering. They also added the fact that it grants the Mending cantrip to the Artificer. And then where previously in the Artificer Unearthed Arcana, these things only lasted for 1 hour, the item now instead lasts until you finish a long rest. But you can still do this a number of times equal to your intelligence modifiers. So like if you're level 1 and you only have like a +3 to your intelligence, then you can make 3 of these things and they last until you finish a long rest. So that's actually pretty cool. I mean, some of these things are consumables, like the oil is a consumable if you use it. Nets and rope are destructible. The caltrops and the ball bearings, they take time to recover when you're using them as a trap. It takes like 10 minutes, I think, if I recall from the adventuring gear section. But there's also just cool things like the bedroll, for example, which, it's kind of a rare situation that this might come up, but the bedroll specifically prevents you from suffering the effects of cold weather. And these do last until you finish a long rest. So you can make one if you have a spare use of this right before you go to a long rest and make sure that you are warm throughout the night in your bedroll. Just a lot of cool different things like that you can do. Well, I'm not surprised that they're giving the Artificer the Mending cantrip. I will say that it's not going to really pack the same oomph that it really did before, because one thing that they did in the original Unearthed Arcana that was released a few months ago that they haven't changed in this one is that you can no longer heal the Battlesmith's Defender, you can't heal your Homunculus Servant, you can't heal the Eldritch Cannons from the Artillerist subclass either. Using the Mending cantrip, all of that was removed. And it's still removed in this Unearthed Arcana as well. So you do have the Mending cantrip to do the things that the Mending cantrip can normally do, but it has no inherent synergy with the Artificer like it currently does. Moving on to their spellcasting feature, so it's completely the same between both Unearthed Arcanas. The number of spells that you can prepare is still a fixed list based on this. You get to change out a cantrip whenever you finish a long rest. Again, they removed ritual casting because everyone can ritual cast now if they know the spell, and it is a ritual. And then they did add that any of the spells that you get from any Artificer features, if they are not on the Artificer spell list, they are still considered Artificer spells for you. And this isn't actually different from the way that it currently is, but they just moved that text from the introduction to all those spell lists and put it in the spellcasting feature. So moving on to Artificer spells, there's only one change here, and it's not even really a change. So they still have the same new spells that they had before: Elementalism, True Strike, Arcane Vigor, which is a healing spell that's new to 2024, Dragon's Breath, Homunculus Servant, and then Circle of Power. They removed the Mending cantrip in the Unearthed Arcana for Eberron because, of course, the Artificer gets it at level 1. And then because of their spellcasting feature, it is already considered an Artificer spell. Moving on to their replicate magic item. So this is the feature that is going to be replacing the infuse item feature. It works kind of similarly, but a little bit different. For anyone who wasn't paying attention the first time, basically you have a list of magic items that you can create rather than having this list of sort of bonus effects that you can put on non-magic items to make them magical. So the same changes still apply here. It's renamed replicate magic item. All the normal infusions have been removed and some of the unique infusions to the Artificer have become magic items. The number of infusions or plans known caps at 8 rather than 12. And then one thing that they did change in this version is that you can now use any wand or weapon you create with the replicate magic item feature as a spellcasting focus in lieu of using one of your artisan's tools to do that. So that's definitely going to be helpful for like the battlesmith for sure, the artillerist for sure. They're usually going to be using a wand. The battlesmith, of course, can use martial weapons. This will make spellcasting sort of on the fly much easier for them. So now we're going to look at the actual replicate magic item lists. So there's been some pretty big changes to these as well. On this one specifically, there aren't a whole lot of changes, but we can see they added a manifold tool, which is new to this Unearthed Arcana. They also added repeating shot here as well as returning weapon. And it is worth noting that the repeating shot and the returning weapon were previously both locked behind the level 6 magic item plans list. Whereas with the current Artificer, you can make these as soon as you get the infused item feature at level 2. So now these are again there at level 2. So that is something that they listened to us on to try to make sure that as many of these infusions that we currently have at certain levels are still available at those levels. And again, like I said, the manifold tool is new, and personally I find it a little controversial. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I'm not a big fan of it in its current iteration, and we'll see why a little bit down the line. For the level 6 magic item plans list, we see a bunch of changes. You can no longer craft any uncommon armor, wand, or weapon. So that's been removed completely, but instead they were kind of put in a bunch of different kinds of armors and even weapons, rings. I think a big reason that they took away the ability to craft any weapon of your choice within a certain range is because of the enspelled weapons. I think were a big point of contention in the original Artificer Unearthed Arcana release. If the Artificer can create any enspelled armor or weapon, being able to choose the spell that goes in it, that is a lot of power just from sort of cherry picking the best things. So I think they kind of wanted to kind of put a tamper on that and put in very specific things that they think are fair and balanced. Of course, if we as DMs want to approve certain things for our players, then we certainly can, but these are the lists that we're currently given. I think most of these are fine lists. The Wand of Web is very, very good. Web is still a very good spell. Weapon of Warning to have advantage on initiative rolls for your team is also very good. It is worth noting that the Radiant weapon here was previously locked behind the level 14 magic item plans list. Now this is down here at the level 6 because the Radiant weapon infusion is available at level 6 as well. So it is now back in line with where it is. And then the Boots of Winding Path and the Spell Refueling Ring, these were previously locked behind the level 10 replicate magic item list, and now they're down here at level 6. Again, this is where this is normally available as an infusion with the current version of the Artificer, so these are all brought back in line. The one thing that is a standout is the Mind Sharpener. This one is currently available to Artificers as an infusion in the current Artificer at level 2 when they get infused item, but this one is still locked behind level 6. Now it is worth noting that this was brought down from level 10 previously in the original Unearthed Arcana for the Artificer, so it is available earlier, but it is still not available at level 2 where it currently is. Now for the Artificer specifically, it's not that big of a deal because there's like 2 level 1 concentration spells for the Artificer, that being Fairy Fire and I think it's Expeditious Retreat. So it's not really until you get to your second level spells at level 5, I think, that you're going to have things like Enlarge, Reduce, Heat Metal, things that are more important that you want to protect your concentration on. So again, for Artificers, probably not that big of a deal to have it at level 6, but this does put it much further out of reach for people who want to dip into the Artificer for infusions, or I guess replicatable magic items, and maybe that's the intent of putting that one so far down. The level 10 magic item plans list, this whole list is new. Previously, you could just create any uncommon ring or wondrous item that isn't cursed. The ability to create an uncommon wondrous item that isn't cursed is still an option here, but you can no longer do rings. And you'll also notice that you see a lot of the +2 versions of things, like a +2 shield, +2 weapon. So notably, this is actually 1 level sooner than the current Artificer gets their bonus to these kinds of things. So the improved shield infusion, for example, is a +1 shield originally at level 2, and then it scales up to +2 at level 11 in the Artificer. So now these things are available 1 level sooner. And then finally at the level 14 magic items plan list, again, it's a whole new list. Previously, this just lets you craft any rare armor, ring, wand, weapon, or wondrous item that isn't cursed. Again, you can still do the rare wondrous items, but you can't do any of the armor, rings, wands, or weapons. At this point, you can get +2 armor, so that's actually 3 levels later than you can currently get it with the Artificer, which is a little unfortunate. And I will say the updated list here isn't too crazy. There are a few good things. An on-demand Flame Tongue is never bad, even if there are some weapons that are kind of strictly better than the Flame Tongue at rare now. Just being able able to make a flame tongue out of nowhere is obviously just very good. The Ring of Protection is also obviously very good. Ring of Free Action also very good. There's also some just good, rare, wondrous items that you can choose from. You know, especially looking at some of the older ones that weren't released specifically in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024. I think the Spell Rot Tattoo is maybe a standout as something that could be maybe a little broken, you know, sort of in the same vein as the Enspelled Weapons or Enspelled Armors, although maybe not quite as much. It does give the Artificer access to a 4th or 5th level spell, especially a 5th level spell sooner than they would normally have access to it, but it doesn't let them cast it multiple times per day like the Enspelled Weapons and Armor do. So maybe it's not that bad. Maybe they're not worried about it. Moving on to the right tool for the job. So this one kind of surprisingly has just been removed. So the right tool for the job is something that just allows you to make an artisan's tool of your choice, and it'll last until you use that feature again. So you always have the right tool for the job. In the original Unearthed Arcana, they changed it so that it was attached to your magical tinkering ability at level 1, but that only lasted for an hour. And my problem with that was that you can't craft anything in an hour. They just kind of straight up removed it. And I will say that they removed it because I believe the manifold tool, you know, the replicatable magic item that I mentioned earlier, is supposed to replace this feature. But again, we'll talk about that a little later when we get to the actual manifold tool. Moving on to the level 6 feature, this is the magic item Tinker. So the one thing that they kept from the old Unearthed Arcana to the new one is the Drain magic item that lets you, once per long rest, destroy or vanish one of your current replicated magic items to restore one of your level 1 or 2 spell slots. So that's still here. It's still exactly the same as it was. But one thing that I'm very, very happy that they actually listened to on is the expanded replication. Basically what they did in the old Unearthed Arcana, the list of the items that you can replicate were given permission by these kinds of features, whereas previously that was just baked into the prerequisites for the infusions or for the magic items that you can create. Anyone who saw my previous video on the Artificer Unearthed Arcana know that I was kind of angry about that one. Not angry, but, you know, just kind of irritated about it because they're kind of piecemealing that permission to us, saying that it's a new feature, but it's really not. But they did get rid of it, so I'm so happy that Wizards of the Coast actually listened to myself and the community. I imagine that was probably a very common critique of that feature, but what they did instead was add a couple different features, the first of which is Charge Magic Item. This lets you, as a bonus action, to expend a spell slot of 1st level or higher to restore a number of charges to a replicated magic item that has charges equal to 1 plus the spell levels. The second one is Transmute Magic Items. So as a magic action, you can take one of your replicated magic items and change it into a different one that you can also create, and you can do that once per long rest. And honestly, I think both of these options are very cool. You know, I think the Charge Magic Item is probably the one that excites me the most. There's a lot of good magic items that you can create using Replicate Magic Item that have charges. And sometimes the thing that you're getting with the charges is higher than the level of spell slot that you're expending to restore your use of it. An example would be like the Helm of Teleportation, where you can expend 1 charge to cast Teleportation, which is a 5th level spell. It has 3 charges per day, but you can basically expend 1 1st level spell slot and get 2 charges of that back. You won't have access to that until level 14. That is something that you could do under this rule. So I'm actually pretty excited. I do really like these changes, but I also will point out that this is taking place of the tool expertise in the current rule. Obviously, this is probably actively better, but it's just weird to me that artificers under these revisions still don't have expertise in anything. Moving on to Flash of Genius, this one has been unchanged completely. It is still exactly the same as it is. Moving on to the level 10 feature, Magic Item Adept. So the only thing that they really did here was removed the expanded replication, which again was the feature that gave you permission to use the replicate magic items level 10 list. So now all this does is let you attune up to 4 magic items at once instead of 3, which is also what it currently does. The one thing that is missing from the current version is that the current version also allows you to, when you craft a magic item of common or uncommon rarity, you can do so in a quarter of the time with half the cost. And to be fair, this isn't a super important feature because again, I don't know how many people actually use crafting in their games, but it just never feels good to have things taken away, even if it is just sort of like this little ribbon feature. So moving on to the level 11 item, we have the spell storing item. So this one is actually buffed in the original Unearthed Arcana for the Artificer, where this can now house a level 3 Artificer spell in addition to levels 1 and 2. It can still do that in the Eberron Unearthed Arcana, but they did add some nerfs to it. The first nerf is that the spell that you store in it cannot require a material component that is consumed by the spell. The second change is that it now requires a magic action to use from an action, which is something that was surprising to me that it wasn't there before, so I'm not surprised that it is here now. And then the second sort of nerf is that once a creature has used the object to produce the spell's effect, the object can't be used that way again until the start of that creature's next turn. So like if you store a fireball, you can't fireball, hand it off to a friend, they fireball, hand it off to a friend, they fireball. There's no shenanigans like that, so that's kind of a good thing that they kind of caught that. The one thing that I don't like is the material component restriction. And the main reason I don't like this is for like flavor kind of reasons. In the current iteration of the Artificer, like 2 of my favorite spells to use with this with are Arcane Lock and Continual Flame, just because there's usually no reason to cast those spells because they require costly consumed components, and there really aren't a whole lot of opportunities to use those spells. It was always in my head, it's like, okay, who creates the big bad evil guy's, secret lair? Like, who puts in the doors? Who creates the flames? Oh, there's a guild of artificers who do all the work, and they're just kind of like a neutral party, and they kind of go in there and do all the construction. So that's kind of why I'm a little bummed by this change, because it just kind of ruins the sort of world building and flavor of the artificer in my head. There's probably some spells that they don't want artificers being able to do for free. I don't remember if artificers have access to Revivify. I don't believe they do, or maybe the alchemist does. So maybe that's why they're restricting it like that. But I think certain spells are catching strays just because they have access to more powerful spells now, which is unfortunate. Moving on to the level 14 Magic Item Savant. This one lets you attune to up to 5 magic items at once. It still does that. It currently does that. They removed the expanded replication feature, thank goodness. But of course, we're still missing the ribbon from the current iteration of the Artificer that allows you to ignore all class, race, spell, and level requirements for attuning to or using a magic item. Again, I don't think there's any reason to make those exclusions. We know that many of those exclusions still exist or maybe have been modified in some ways. Some of them have been removed in the new Dungeon Master's Guide, but not all of them. So I don't see any reason why they need to remove that line of text. Moving on to level 18, Magic Item Master. This one is exactly the same as it is and was. Level 19, of course, they get access to the Epic Boon. Nothing has been changed here. Finally, moving on here to the Soul of Artifice. The one thing in that has stayed the same between the two changes is that it is no longer a reaction to cheat death. You just can do this when you are reduced to 0 hit points. But they also kind of buffed the cheat death, but also kind of didn't. The change here is that you can choose any number of uncommon or rare items created by a replicate magic item feature and sacrifice as many of them as you want. And when you do so, you instead regain a number to 20 times that number. However, I will say, based on the current description of this, there's probably not a huge reason to ever do that unless you're specifically trying to avoid power word kill or a similar feature that is based on whatever your current hit points is. My critique of the old one is that 20 hit points is basically just one hit away from death anyway. But without like a once per turn or like once per short rest limitation on this, you're kind of better off just sacrificing one item at a time. And that's for multiple reasons. One, you just get to keep more of your magic items for longer. And two, if the creature is doing a lot of damage, where they're doing like 40 damage per hit, but you're only healing for 20, they basically have to waste half of their damage, knocking you down again. And specifically at this level, creatures are hitting hard, but they're not hitting so hard that they can one-shot you with massive damage and kill you outright. That's usually not a thing that's going to happen at this level. So this is still a buff, but I don't think it's quite the buff that maybe they're hoping that it was. They would basically have to nerf this to make this stronger, which I don't agree would be the play, but this is still fine. But the more important change here was the change to magical guidance. Previously in the original Unearthed Arcana was that they allowed you to add 1d6 to any and every ability check that you make, provided that you are attuned to at least one magic item. And then in the Eberron Unearthed Arcana, they changed it so that whenever you use your Flash of Genius, if that ability check or saving throw fails anyway, that Flash of Genius charge isn't used, provided that you're still attuned to at least one magic item. However, this is still a far cry from the current iteration of this ability, and it's not even called Magical Guidance. It doesn't have a name, but you currently get +1 bonus to all saving throws per magic item that you're attuned to, and that is just strictly better than both of these things, just bar none. Like, Flash of Genius buff, I guess, is better than the Magical Guidance originally. It's just more uses of your Flash of Genius and make sure that they're not ever wasted. However, again, my only experience playing an Artificer was in a level 20 one-shot against a CR 30 creature, and even with my massively inflated saving throws with like your cloak and or ring of protections and things like that, I still failed some of those saving throws. And so it's like, when you're at level 20 and you're fighting the kinds of monsters that a level 20 person should be fighting against, you need these massively inflated numbers, and getting a buyback on Flash of Genius isn't going to fix that. So I still am not happy with the Magical Guidance. The cheat death buff is fine, but Magical Guidance, again, we need our high saving throws. So then moving on to the spells for the Artificer, there was only one spell that's introduced for them, and that's the Homunculus Servant. Again, this is currently an infusion, but they're planning on changing it into a spell for the Artificer, a level 2 conjuration spell. Nothing about this has changed between the two revisions, and that's kind of a bad thing, because my number one complaint about this spell is that it requires a gem or crystal worth 100 gold, which it currently does in the infusion version. However, it consumes that material component when you cast the spell. So you get this little, flying companion that can do, it can attack, it can move around, it can do all this different stuff, but it consumes the 100 gold worth of components every time that you cast it. And that's just silly because, yes, it can attack. It's like a familiar that can attack, but it really doesn't do that much damage and has such little hit points that it's going to just die outright, especially once you get to a certain level. Even if you upcast this to 5th level, it's only going to have 30 hit points. And if you're at the level where you have 5th level spells, then this thing is probably going to be one shot by anything that wants to kill it anyway. So I still believe that this spell is just way too expensive for what it is. Here's the rest of the changes to the Homunculus stat block. Again, everything has been the same from the previous Unearthed Arcana to the current one. In the final stretch here, we have the infusions. So we have the Boots of Winding Path. These things are the same. Helm of Awareness is the same. But the Manifold Tool, so we see the Manifold Tool. It's a wondrous item. It is a common rarity. It requires attunement. And it says this tool takes the form of a wrench, screwdriver, or other basic tool. As a magic action, you can touch the item and transform it into a type of artisan's tools of your choice. Whatever form the tool takes, you have proficiency with it when you use it. So it's cool that you can create any artisan's tool of your choice and have proficiency with that. However, my problem with this is kind of twofold. One, this is now taking up one of your replicated magic items for the day. Secondly, this takes attunement. Now, the level 6 feature that was introduced here in the Eberron Unearthed Arcana would allow you to switch out the Manifold Tool when you're done using it for a more useful item once per long rest. But remember that this is currently taking place of the right tool for the job, which basically just lets you do this. You basically spend a short rest or sometime during the long rest, you spend 1 hour crafting whatever artisan's tools that you need, and then you have that until you use this feature again. It doesn't disappear. You just have the tool whenever you need it. So I don't know what their problem is with the right tool for the job feature. I don't think it's way too strong or overpowered to have, again, the right tool for the job when you need it. Tools don't really come up all that often. Even with all the changes to tools and things like that in the 2024 rules, I still don't think there's really that many opportunities for specific artisans tools to come up. So I really don't understand what they're trying to do here. It's just overall just really silly to me that the class that's sort of originally designed to be the best with all tools is sort of having these features stripped away from them, or at least limited so harshly. Moving on to the other replicatable magic items, again, we have the Mind Sharpener, the Radiant Weapon. These are both the same. Repeating Shot, Repulsion Shield, again, these are both the same, as well as the Returning Weapon and the Spell Refueling Ring. These are all exactly as they were in the previous version, and all of these, except for the Mind Sharpener, are currently in line with where they currently are. Moving on to my kind of final summary and thoughts here. So there were no changes to the core traits, nor would I have really expected any. I guess the only ones that I would have expected were to add an additional skill known for the Artificer to kind of be in line with their classes that grant an additional skill when you multi-class into them. That's the only thing that I would still suggest is for Wizard of the Coast to just follow their own unwritten rules. For the level 1 Magical Tinkering, again, it was renamed to Tinker's Magic. It grants the Mending cantrip, and items created with it last until the end of the next long rest. Again, Wizards of the Coast removed class synergies with Mending, such as healing the Homunculus Servant, Battlesmith Defender, or the Artillerist Cannons. That addition feels a little empty. I would like to see that added back. Level 2, the wands and weapons created by Replicate Magic item can be used as spellcasting foci. Replicate Magic item lists have more specific items and kind of limit the amount of cherry picking that you can do. My only real complaint here is that I still think the Mind Sharpener should be brought down to the level 2 spell list. Other classes multi-classing into Artificer to get that item. That's also a 2-level dip into that class just for that reason. Plus it takes their reaction, and I think that's perfectly fine. Level 3, the right tool for the job was removed and replaced by the Manifold tool. Again, I think this is just a mistake. The current iteration of the feature is fine. If anything, I would buff the current iteration of the feature to operate more like the Manifold tool, where whichever tool you create, you are proficient with that tool, and then change the Manifold tool to a generic magic item that anyone could have, but remove the fact that you are proficient with that tool when you have it, and maybe remove attunement for that reason. Again, the Artificer is supposed to be the master of all trades, or at least that's always been my impression of them, so I would really like to see this kind of changed back to the old version, if not a buffed version of the old version. For the level 6 feature, again, speaking of the Master of All Trades, the Tool Expert feature is again just completely removed. And I remember even during the initial 1 D&D Unearthed Arcanas, when they're talking about the new release of the 2024 books, they were initially sort of going around with grouping classes into specific groups, and one of those was the Expert group, like the Rogue, the Ranger, basically classes that get expertise in things, and the Artificer was listed as one of those, even though it's not a class that would be present in the player's handbook. So it's strange to me that they considered it an expert class, but they don't get expertise in anything. I still think that they could put that into one of the level 10 or 14 magic item adept or savant features. For the actual level 6 feature, the magical item Tinker, this is the one that lets you use a spell slot to restore charges to a replicated magic item that has charges. And it also lets you swap out a replicated magic item for a different one once per long rest. Again, I really like this change. I like this one a lot. I'm really happy that they removed the expanded magic item replication or whatever that stupid feature was. I feel like this feature is very in line with a class that kind of really isn't supposed to be a spellcaster, so to speak, you know, in the same way that like a wizard or even a ranger is, but rather that the effects of their inventions are perceived perceived as magical. And I just feel like this plays into that a lot more. With the level 10 and 14 features, the Magic Item Adept and Savant, again, they both don't have those ribbon features. And again, this is probably just me having my fear of missing out and wanting not to lose anything with a revision, even something so small. The level 20, again, we saw that the cheat death was sort of buffed, but also kind of not. The magical guidance is better than the old version in the Artificer Unearthed Arcana, but it's still nothing like the current version where you get a +1 to your saving throws for every item that you have attuned. Again, that'd be +6 at most, basically like having proficiency in all of your saving throws, which is something that the monk gets at like level 14. Now, you already do have proficiency in some of your saving throws, so that'd be like having expertise in those saving throws. But again, the kind of creatures that you're fighting at level 20, assuming that your DM is appropriately challenging you, you're going to want those bonuses to your saves because the saving throws at that level are much, much higher than you would expect. Finally, the Homunculus Servant, again, I think 100 gold is still way too much for a creature that can be destroyed so easily. And I think the main problem is that they're thinking of this Homunculus Servant as more of a familiar and less as a summon, like the Summon Beast spell. Now, given those do require concentration, but the summon spells just have an expensive component that you need to cast the spell, but they don't consume that component, whereas Find Familiar, it doesn't require concentration and they can't attack, and it requires a cheaper component, but it is consumed. So either they need to dramatically reduce the cost, or just make it an expensive component that you need to have, but it's not consumed by the spell. Maybe they could even buff it ever so slightly and make it concentration to treat it like a summon, something along those lines. You know, give it multi-attack scaling, something like that, so that it gets an extra attack if you upcast it to the 4th level or something. So that's it. That's all the comparisons to the old Artificer Unearthed Arcana to the new Artificer Unearthed Arcana. There's been some good changes, some changes that show that they were kind of maybe listening to our feedback. But again, I still think there are a number of things and a number of very kind of important things still don't feel very good. But you know what? That just might be my opinion. Again, you can let me know what you think about all this down in the comments below. And while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. Again, if you are a new viewer or returning viewer to this channel and you like what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out quite a bit. I release new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you always have something to look forward to. And this guy asked for it, so I figured out how to do it. So I'll see you in the next one.